All right, guys, I'm Mitch. I'm a prior sear specialist. I work for Agonic. Today we're going to go over tool maintenance, how to sharpen them, and how to maintain them in the field. So for your tools and cutting blades, they all have a different purpose. You either have splitting or wedges, you have chopping, and then you also have slicing. Most of the axes that you're going to see out there are going to be specifically for chopping or splitting. And you can tell that by the way that they designed the heads of those axes. So like these good old Fiskars, you can see the bevel that they have on there for the angle, how it's closer to a 45-degree angle that you would have on a wedge. And what that's doing is it's forcing the fibers of the wood apart as fast as humanly possible to allow it to split wood faster. That's why this does really good for splitting logs and things of that nature. However, because of that bevel and the weight that's behind it, it actually gets stuck inside of a lot of trees because it's not designed for chopping. So this is great for one purpose, but not so great for the other. When we're looking at some of the other axe heads, like the Husqvarnas, the angle is already different so that it digs into the wood a little bit faster, a little bit deeper, but then also the bevel edge for the blade itself is more conducive to having a sharper edge to it as well, which allows it to cut a little bit better and chop more as opposed to splitting. Can I use it as a splitter? Yes, but it's more purpose-built for chopping as opposed to splitting. You also can have that in your different knives as well. So if you have like a Fieldcraft knife, you can see like the bevels on them are very similar. It's closer to the chopping that you would see in some of those like felling axes and things of that nature, especially with the back edge of the blades and the angles that are going through for the bevel. It's more focused towards chopping as opposed to splitting. And then when we get into more refined work, dealing with smaller edged knives, your bevel is very, very slim. So a rule of thumb, if when you're looking at the blade type and the purpose for that tool, 45 is to split, 22.5 is to chop, and then half that again to 11.25 is going to be for slicing. A scalpel, I believe, if our memory serves me right, is around like 10 degrees bevel. So that's the purpose behind all the different bevels and why you can look at a knife and go, oh, this is made for this purpose. It's important to know that because otherwise you could try to be splitting wood with a slicing tool and it's going to take you forever. It's not finely tuned to the purpose of that action in order to best serve itself. So when we're looking at sharpening those things, we need to make sure that we have those the purpose of that tool in mind. Do I need a splitting tool as sharp as a razor? Absolutely not. It defeats the whole purpose of the tool. So like this Fiskars, I don't need it to be razor sharp because all it needs to do is shove wood apart as fast as humanly possible. Can it do that dull? Absolutely. It's using the weight to do its work for it. So I don't need to do a whole lot of work in order to make this a functional tool. When it comes into felling axes, yeah, you still need to keep on top of them in order to make sure that they stay sharp so it can bite into the wood deep enough. It can actually remove chunks more effectively, and it's not going to get stuck into the wood. So when we're dealing with sharpening our tools and everything else like that, we have other specific tools to allow us to do that. And they have different purposes as well. For the edges, we want all the burrs gone. Burrs are where the cutting edge or the bevel of the blade are askew. So instead of having it perfectly symmetrical on both sides, you can have one over the other, or you can have gaps in your bevel as well, where you have nicks and chips that have been taken out of the edge. Ideally, you want to get rid of all those nicks first before going into refining your bevel. That's where files become really handy. So you can grind down the top edge of the tool in that direction so that it gets nice and even and you don't have any nicks or dings in the actual cutting edge. You want to get rid of all those. You don't want a serrated edge for a fine, precise tool. Serrated edges do have a purpose. They're really good for grinding through materials. I like having a serrated edge on the back of some of the survival knives every now and again, kind of like on this guy that you had there, because what I can use that for is cutting up roots underground without messing up the actual cutting edge of the blade itself. So I can actually use that to cut through roots if I need to, put this into the ground for different scenarios and things of that nature, and it's not going to damage the actual cutting edge of the blade itself. So serrated edges do have a purpose. There are times for them. They act in essence like little saws, but as far as sharpening them, they're a huge pain in the butt because you have to get rat tail files and special honing stones in order to get all those different angles just right. And it's like sharpening every single one like a chisel, and it's a pain in the butt, and I absolutely despise doing it. So I just prefer not to have a serrated edge. It'll work longer. So asking if a serrated edge lasts longer than a standard blade, it can. It'll be more functional for a longer period of time, but it won't be as effective as to just taking 5 minutes to sharpening up a straight edge.
It's more of the tooth action.
Yes, the more the tooth action is what's actually doing the work as opposed to the blade cutting things. So the serrated edge is ripping and tearing things apart, whereas like a sharp blade edge is actually chopping or separating the fibers itself and all those different things that you're trying to do, whether it's like processing an animal, chopping through wood, cutting material. A sharper edge is always going to be better. Serrated edge, not as clean cuts. It's going to be more rudimentary. It's not going to be as precise, and you have to use more force as opposed to a refined edge that you would have on a cutting blade, which makes it more dangerous. A chef will tell you that the safest knife is a sharp knife because it cuts predictably and they know exactly what it's going to do. It's not going to catch on anything or do weird angles and stuff like that. So it's always preferred to have your tools as sharp as humanly possible, at least for the purpose, right? When we're get all the burrs and nicks and dings and everything else out of the blade, just for instance, because you got a couple in here. It seems counterintuitive, but if you look at the blade itself and we kind of go over the top of the head, you'll see where the nicks are and the dark parts that are still forming as I go over top of it. We want to get rid of all of those so it's a uniform color across the entire surface. You'll even feel it every now and again, grabbing and letting go with the files. And that kind of gives you a good estimation as to where they're happening and how much more work you have to do to grind down that edge. This can take a long time with, depending on the file that you have. There's a couple different versions out there. You can have like single bastard files, you can have a double bastard file. There's diamond files out there. My multi-tool has a double bastard and a diamond file on it, and those are also different tools for different purposes. A bastard file will remove a lot of material very, very quickly, whereas like a diamond file is more refining, fine-tuned, removing of metal as you're going through, because that's all we're doing is just removing metal. So now this is all nice and smooth. It's an even level all the way across on the bevel of it. And now we have to go in and actually hone that so that it's an even edge on both sides across. And we can either use a file again to start that process, which can take time. Yeah, so then the manufacturer will have its own bevel, and I want to match up to that bevel as I'm kind of going across it. If it doesn't have like a sharp bevel in the blade itself, The angle that you're looking for is the thickness of the back of the blade up. So with the Fisker, it looks like about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. If I go 1 inch to 1.5 inches up from the back of the blade, it almost matches perfectly with the actual bevel of that cutting tool. So it's a good rule of thumb to use in order to find what the manufactured and intended bevel of that tool is the same width of the blade up, and then match up that angle. And you just have to maintain it as you're going through and kind of removing metal again until it gets up to that polished edge. There is a process of doing a double bevel. So once you have the initial bevel here, you can steepen it and round a little bit as you're going through. And what that does is, especially for splitting tools, it starts to force the fibers apart faster. And it's a little bit easier to maintain because it's a conical shape, which later on when you're looking at like maintaining an edge, it's easier to maintain a conical edge as opposed to a flat surface. But that's just one of the other ways of having to go through the process of it. Bigger files do a lot faster work of this as opposed to some of these little ones, but it's still better than just going through with a stone, you know. Consistency is also important. You want to do the same amount of sharpening on one side as you do on the other, because if you don't, what you'll end up doing is forcing the metal to fold over top of your bevel. And you can feel it with your thumb by going towards the blade edge, and you'll feel like some of that metal grab onto your thumb a little bit. It's not sharp going this way, but you can feel like, hey, I focused a little too much on this portion of it, and the metal's actually folding over to that side. So you have to go back and file that down again until it's even on both ends. Once it's there, for a chopping tool, I just want it even on both sides, and when I look down at the top, I don't see my reflection or a shiny portion of that edge shining back at me. The second that I don't have it, it's going to be sharp enough to split wood. It really doesn't take a whole lot, and you can do it pretty quickly. For the other ones, that's where you might need to focus more with different tools other than just a file. Because a file is still pretty rudimentary. It'll still grind through the metal pretty quick, but it doesn't really hone an edge, right? Barbers would never sharpen razors for your face using a file. It just doesn't make sense. They're not going to do it because they need a very precise tool. Chopping axis, not a precise tool. Tell you what, if Steve puts this in his leg later on, at least it'll be a clean cut. Don't do it, Steve. Don't put this axe into your leg again. They have like angle devices out there now that will force you to maintain that angle as you're running through and sharpening everything. But as long as you're meeting that same intended purpose, their nicety, it's really good if you're trying to get like razor sharp kitchen knives and stuff like that, but you don't need it in the field. It's extra weight and it gets in the way. All right, so once we have kind of a decent start on the edge, that's when we can refine it a little bit more. And you can have a couple different versions depending on the grit of the stones. There's ceramic ones, that's what this one is. There's also like these multi-grain hockey puck ones that I've used before. And one side will be more coarse than the other one will be a finer thing. And you can either do a circular pattern in order to sharpen it, and that's more going over like how much time you're spending on one side before flipping it over and doing the other side. Again, maintaining that same bevel angle. Exactly. So the rough cut of the files, creating its own micro burrs on the edge of the bevel, and the ceramic or the honing stones or even a river rock that you can pull out of the stream, they do really good at polishing up an edge, at least a rudimentary edge that's been aggressively moved by a file, which is literally just grinding its way across the metal and removing it as fast as it possibly can. So this tries to like flatten down those edges and really make it sharper and polished up. It does. Yep. So like you were saying, the polishing up that edge prevents things from sticking to it as well. So having a good polished edge on your cutting tools prevents it from getting stuck when you're trying to cut or chop with things. It allows other material to run off of it. It also prevents as much maintenance. A polished surface has less pores that will accept less water, which means less rust. So having a polished metal is actually going to last longer in an environment as opposed to a very rough cut piece of metal. So that guy still has quite a bit of shine coming back towards us, so we'll end up doing a lot more grinding. It's hard to see some of the actual edge of the bevel or the tip of the bevel when you're using the rough files, because it's creating so many points of reflection that you're like, I mean, it could be there, which is why I'll go back and forth between like using a file to a whetstone and back and forth until I really know what the condition of the edge is. Just because otherwise you could be fooling yourself. You could look at it and be like, man, that looks like crap. But it's because the file that you're using is creating all those little micro burrs that haven't been polished up yet. This also works really good on a belt sander. It's so much faster. It's what I usually do at the house in order to do it really, really quick. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. And we'll get to the knife. I just wanted to, my OCD is preventing me from letting this axe out of my hand until it is done. I don't have many ticks, but polishing up a tool for work before I put it away is one of them. Belt sander. Belt sander is by far faster, because what I can do on a belt sander is I can find the angle, get it right there, hold it, and just go. Flip it to the other side and.
Would you hone it then too?
Absolutely, because the sanding is still going to, leaving micro burrs, and you'll have like an angle of the grind from the sandpaper when you're doing that. So I would still go in and hone it with a stone afterwards, because it's still going to polish up and fill in those pores, get it down to raw metal again. It's going to be a better cutting edge overall. So like even belt sanding, still finish up with like a honing stone or anything else like that in order to really get it in there. So the other thing is, on the whetstones, you'll have two camps of thought or training, one using water for a whetstone and the other one's using oil. There are specific sharpening stones for each, but when it comes down to it, if you started by using oil, you are stuck using oil with that whetstone. You shouldn't use mixed contaminated fluids for your sharpening stones. Water and oil do not mix well. And when you try to use them for sharpening things, it does weird things with the metal shavings that you'll never be able to get rid of out of the pores of your sharpening stone. So when you're wetting a stone, the purpose is that the water is filling up the pores on your honing stone. The oil will do the same thing. It fills in all the little holes and micro areas for it, so that when you are rubbing it against the metal, it allows the metal to see the pores, be moved by them, but are actually expended from the pores of the stone by the water. So you want to keep it wet, either with the water if you started that, or with the oil if you're doing it that way, but it needs to stay wet as you're sharpening across it. Because otherwise the pores on the honing stone will actually fill up with metal, and your polished edge that you're trying to get won't be there anymore. You'll get more micro burrs because you're reintroducing metal burrs back onto a cutting edge that you're trying to polish. So it's tedious and it's annoying, but if you start feeling like your stone's getting dry, you have to get water back on it again or oil back on it again before going back at it, because you'll just dull your blade again.
For fresh stone, do you just soak it till bubbles stop coming out?
Yeah, so fresh stones you'll soak it until there's no more bubbles. Some of them won't have a lot of bubbles because they're just not there. And it also depends on the coarseness of the stone and the material that it's made out of as to how much it's going to be. Also, like the different types of stones out there for honing, cutting edge, refine themselves as you use it more. So like there's an Arkansas honing stone out there. It's a white kind of ceramic feeling kind of stone. And it starts off super coarse and it's really abrasive, but the more you use it on one edge, the more it gets refined as well, and it turns into its own polished edge. And you can actually get things a mere finish using those consistently with the same material, whether it's water or oil that you're using in order to treat it. You can actually get those to polish up and actually mirror finish and edge with it. So there's lots of cool stuff out there for it, and there's lots of cool things that people are making for them out there too. Ceramics do really good because they're cheap and they can polish up edges really well. That looks really good. So now on this guy, what I'm doing is a sun check. So with the sun right there, I'm trying to see if the cutting edge has any light that's reflecting back at me. And what that's showing is a flat surface, like there's one right there that I can barely see where that edge is bouncing back at me. However, we can already see, like from the state that this started at, the edge that was all rusted and dinged up, that's all gone now. It's an actual shiny, nearly polished up edge. And with this tool being as blunt of an object or tool that it is, this is sharp enough to do its job and then some. If Steve accidentally hits his shin with this, it will go into his leg this time. Okay, so that's what we're looking at with those kind of tools. For fixed blade knives, it's a similar process, same sort of thing. I don't have a whole bunch of nicks and dings in this blade that are going to need attention, but I can still either refine it using a honing stone, or other things that you can also use are diamond files. They work pretty well. Again, finding that bevel, and you can do a draw method as opposed to that circular method that I did mostly on this one. And the draw method is just starting off with the same bevel, starting at one point, and as I'm going down, I move the sharpening edge down towards the tip, trying to maintain that angle the entire time. And the control is the bigger thing inside of the draw method, because it allows me to really refine an edge for more precise tools in order to make sure that I'm staying on that bevel, and I can count the same amount of strokes that I'm giving for each side. So I know for certain, hey, it's not a time-based thing with the circular method where pressure was a big thing. Now it's like quantities making sure that it's an even division between the left and the right side. And then just, again, going back behind it with a honing stone afterwards.
So is this how you sharpen your knives at home too? You just use a honing stone, or do you have another?
So I have another set at home that I keep in the kitchen, and it's a double ceramic portion of it, and that double ceramic has a coarse and a fine edge on it. And the nice thing about those is because they're bigger, I can just leave it on the sink medium that I have and keep water running on top of it, so it keeps the flow of all the metal that I'm grinding away, and I can draw the blade across. So when it's sitting on the counter, I can start at one point and I can draw through it. And you can see like every last ounce of the metal that I'm grinding away on the knife stays on the whetstone as we're going through. And then same thing, drawing it away. You also notice, like when I'm sharpening, I'm drawing the blade through, almost like I'm cutting through the top of the stone. And the reason for that is if I'm pulling back, what that's going to force is the metal to go over again. So if I'm pushing through that, especially when I'm honing and refining the edge, it prevents me from curling that bevel over, and it forces everything to align better. Again, this being kind of like a medium tool between chopping and slicing, it doesn't need to be super precise. I would still want to be able to look at it and know, hey, there's no burrs, there's no nicks, I'm not seeing my reflection in the edge again. As long as it's meeting all those criteria, it should be good. When we're going into our more refined tools, like our folders and little things like that, where this needs to be a slicing tool, right? I'm not forcing this through a tree at any point in time. I'm wanting this mostly for either shaving, whittling, skinning, gutting, things of that nature. I don't want it to get caught up in any of the furs, tendons, muscles, tissue, anything else like that. I want it to slice through the material very well. So this needs to be more refined and almost like a scalpel sharpness to it, which again, we're looking at the same concept of the bevel, the thickness of the back of the blade, as the angle to the actual honing stone itself. Just nice and easy, controlled, refined, getting that edge going through. Once all the little burrs and nicks are out of the way, then we can do a third sharpening option on these slicing tools to truly polish up the edge and make sure that it just glides through any material that it encounters, and that's going to be stropping. So stropping is what you'll see old-timey barbers do with fixed blade razors. And what that's doing is it's using leather and a polishing compound in order to fill in all the pores of metal's edge, and it allows it to slice through objects a lot easier when you have a polished edge as opposed to a roughly refined thing. So the ceramic does really good with the water. It starts to get you a good cutting edge, but when you really want something to shine and go above and beyond, you can strop. Once you're done stropping on your precise tools and everything else like that, you should be able to look at the edge and have a nice polished portion to it. Depending on the type of rouge that you have, you can actually see your own reflection and everything else like that bouncing right back at you. But once you have that all set up in place, all the burrs are nice and even, it'll be sharp enough to slice through anything that you want to give it to. All right, so that tool will be ready to go from there. Overall, 3 different styles of tools: chopping, splitting, and slicing. All have different purposes. The bevel's going to be different on each. Biggest rule of thumb: your bevel angle for your sharpening tools is going to be the same thickness of the blade, height up and down, in order to find the proper angle for that tool. You have a lot of different tools that you can utilize. It all depends on what you have with you, whether it's going to be natural or man-made tools, stones, honing stones, files, all that sort of stuff, or even stropping when you're getting through. Again, the focus is to get the tool to do its job, not to make a tool do something that it's not designed for. So just focus on making it be functional.